Okay, let me get to tonight's presentation. Uh, the presentation is called Motion in Multiples. It's by a photographer by the name of Jamie Konarski Davidman.
Davidson.
Davidman, right?
David's son.
Davidson,
David's son. Sorry,
Son
my
of
bad.
David.
Yes. Okay. Jamie's website is www.newlifephotos.com. It's all one word, of course. New Life Photos. Um, I saw Jamie give a presentation a couple of weeks ago at one of our Florida camera clubs, and I was very impressed by it. And she's here tonight. Jamie is a freelance photographer specializing in outdoor and nature subjects. Uh, if any of you know what the lens baby is, that bunch of little optics that fit on your camera and give you some weird effects, some really nice uh, looks to images. Jamie is a Lens Baby ambassador.
Oh,
So at the end, if you have any questions about it, um, we're in the process of trying to get a Lens Baby person to give a presentation later in the year. Okay. Um, Jamie is a member of the North American Nature Photography Association. She used to be on the board in the old days, and she's also a member of the Carolinas Nature Photography Association and some other things. If you've been to a lot of workshops and presentations around the country, like out of Chicago and Mike Motz's Macro Conference and Jackie Kramer's photography series, Hunt's Photos, speaker series, the New England Camera Club Council, uh, and many more. She's presented at all of them. She leads workshops throughout the East Coast, from New York, upstate New York, going down to Florida. So if you're interested, check her out at her website. Now I'll turn the program over to Jamie. If you want to add anything about yourself, Jamie, now's the time to do it, and then start your program.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
Jamie, excuse me, do you want me to mute everybody or would you prefer to have people interact with you as you go through your presentation?
I think I can stop for questions,
Okay.
periodically. And if there are any, I'm happy to, you're not going to break my flow or anything if there is a question. So feel
And
free.
I won't mute people, okay.
Okay. All right. Yeah, but if somebody has a dog or something like that, you can mute them. Anyway, later in the year, if you're looking for somebody to do a program on Lens Baby, I'm happy to step in if you don't find someone else that you think might be more interesting. Um, anyway, I love all kinds of photography, and believe it or not, I grew up on Long Island, in Blue Point on the South Shore, and I've been away since I was 22. I just entered Medicare. I think it's Medicare. Yeah. That age bracket now. So I've been away more from Long Island more than I have been there. But it's always fun to hear the accents that come out of everybody from where I used to be. So anyway, thank you for having me. This program, I'm going to share my screen, getting creative with motion and multiples. Let's see, here we go. And so we're going to talk about ICM, basically, that's the motion, and then multiple exposures. And what I use them for is really to just, let's see, I need a little click for a second. I use them to for a lot of reasons. Number one is it helps me to sort of shake off the dust if I'm not seeing something or if I'm not inspired. It kind of just gives me some unique ways to approach a scene or a subject to kind of just break the ice. The cool thing about either of these techniques is that they're not about exact settings and perfect images. They're really about uh, the ultimate effect is more abstract and interpretive rather than this is a blank. So I personally love that it's not about being perfect, but rather to get creative and look at things sort of in a different way. They are, however, ICM and multiple exposures. They are in the avenue, as I would say, of intentional. So ICM, intentional camera movement. You'll see a lot of different ways that people do ICM, and you are moving the camera, but it's intentional. You're not. Sometimes we have happy accidents, and I wouldn't necessarily call this a happy accident. This is a combination of me trying to get a straight shot of the anemone, and the wind kept blowing. So sometimes things happen like that, but for the most part, when I'm doing intentional camera movement, I'm doing it on purpose and with a level of intention. Both of these techniques can be done with any camera. You can even do them with your phones. They're not for the one and done, type of photographer where you get what you want and then you move on. I call that a lot of times, I call that the hit and run photographer. Okay, I got it. I'm going to move on to the next subject. With both of these techniques, you have to kind of think about, well, what direction should I move? How fast, how slow, how many frames? So every time you do this, you're going to get a unique result. And so that spurs on doing it again and again until you get the image that you're looking for that just feels good. But as I said, it's a technique that I use, both of them, to shake off the dust and just expand my vision, your vision, and also be in the mindset of playing and asking, oh, I wonder what would happen if I did blank, and then doing it. Ralph Waldo Emerson said it's a happy talent to know how to play. And I think the older we get, we forget that this is supposed to be fun, right? And that playing and experimenting is part of that childlike wonder that sometimes we lose because we're just so adamant about doing it correctly. And I think injecting play into the concept is important. So why do it? Well, number one, I think it's because we're looking to create abstract impressionistic images, techniques to create our own textures that we can use with other images. It allows us to reinterpret the scene and the subject. And also, I call it making the lemonade. When the conditions are not right for a particular type of image. Let's say I go out to the gardens and I'm looking to do flower photography and macro and close-up, and the wind keeps blowing. Well, that's an opportunity to not pack up everything and leave because it's windy, but rather to say, oh, well, I can do ICM or I can do multiple exposures, and you can still be out there photographing and playing. And then, lastly, just because I want to do it. It's something different to just flex your creative muscles. The thing about both of them is that we still need to think about composition and put colors and shapes and whatnot in the frame in ways that make sense, and that, I'm going to just say it, you'll probably hear it a few times, but that feel right, feel good. You know, you can walk into a room and a piece of furniture is in an odd location or odd angle. It just doesn't feel right. And so that's kind of the same thing with our images, is that, you know, when it feels right, it feels good, and we can move forward. Your exposure, you want to get your exposure correct for the light that you're working with. And you also need to know what you can do with your camera. So we'll talk about it a little bit more, but like in-camera multiple exposures, some systems like Sony, unless something has changed, they don't let you do multiple exposures in camera. Olympus, for example, 2 or 3 frames. Nikon and Canon, I'm a Nikon shooter, 9 and 10 frames in camera. Do I always use 9 or 10 frames? No, but I like, it's sort of like, you know, our cars when we're driving, you know, just because it says 120 miles an hour doesn't mean we need to go that fast, nor do I need to shoot multiples with 10 frames at all times. And I'll show you some different examples of where 2 frames is perfectly fine. But you need to know what your camera can do, and be able to be prepared for accepting the limitations, or accepting that we need to put limitations on ourselves as well. So these techniques are the kinds of techniques that you're not going to just do 1 or 2 frames and then you're done. Not if you find a subject that is working for you. You might come out of the field with 10 or 15 or 20, depending on what it is. So if you think that in 3 tries you're going to get exactly what you want, you may, if you do it a lot and it's something that's intuitive to you. But very often I'm doing way more frames than I think, because something's working, or it's not quite there, and I tweak something and try again, and you know, so it's an over and over and over type of situation. But what's important, I think, is to be open and curious. And I know that, you know, there's at least one person in this room, in this Zoom, who has seen this, so knows what the source of this image is. But here too, so these are, the first one is an ICM, and this one is a multiple exposure. And just to make things a little more efficient, the source subject of these 2 images and the third one is a set of colored plastic chairs. Down in Florida, I'm walking around, I'm looking for things to photograph, and I thought, you know, well, what could I do with this stack of chairs? And so you just saw 3 images from a series that I did. So the message in this here is to not underestimate the potential of whatever's in front of you. There's always something that you can find that's creative and different. Am I going to use any of these for any particular purpose? Maybe, but maybe it's just for me to say, oh, this is an opportunity to do something different. Some tips, more tips for motion and multiples. Like I mentioned, you can use any lens. Typically, unless the sky is in just the right tonality, I'm going to avoid the sky, because bright areas in either of these techniques can become a distraction, just like dark holes can be distracting. So I'm working within a certain framework, and what that means is that if I'm doing motion, I'm going to make sure that I'm not including the sky. If I'm photographing trees, sometimes the sky can add to the separation of the subjects, but sometimes it just looks like little squiggles, and it doesn't work. So you have to kind of experiment there. the filters that I use, I always use a circular polarizer. I'm just, like just get up on the soapbox and say, really, if you're outside, you should be using a circular polarizer, and particularly even in an urban environment, you've got glare and sheen and things like that that can be controlled by the polarizer. If I'm trying to do ICM and it's really bright out, then I may add, very, very few times do I add this, but you might consider having a 3-stop ND filter in your pocket or your bag in case you want to slow down the shutter speed and you're not able to with your settings. So there are no mistakes. They're just different images. And I think that the two phrases that I have in the back of my head at all times is I wonder and what if. So I wonder what would happen if I did this or if I tried that. And then the answer is not, well, I don't know, but the answer is to try it and see what happens. So when we're looking for candidates for both of these techniques, I'm going to give you some examples. I do a lot of flowers and macro and close-up. And so details in petals, this is a peony, but this is just a wave of a curve within a peony. And so this is a straight shot, but if you notice, I could do ICM and I could follow the curve of these petals, or I could do multiple and I could do the same thing in terms of tracking. Here is a camellia, again, a very tight shot of just the folds in the petals. Another candidate that you could work with in terms of florals. And I also use a macro lens. I also use macro filters in addition, because I'm always looking to get closer. But let's say, for example, you're out in the woods, you're doing fall color. This is a great candidate. This type of scene is great for motion and multiple. And so here are just some examples. So years ago, I had a camera that I didn't have image overlay, right? This was DSLR. I didn't have image overlay. So what I had to do is track for this vertical tracking. I would just have my focus point on that particular tree, and I would just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is probably 10 frames, and I would track up the tree. The motion, I'm moving up, and the look and feel of an ICM is different depending on how fast or slow you move, what direction, and what's in the scene. So these are just two examples of the same scene in different approaches. I love, and you'll see the settings on here. So, there's no magic number. There really isn't, and you'll see how it varies. But for ICM, I'm typically looking at a small, low ISO and a small aperture. So here, for example, f/25. Well, why would I do f/25? Number one, I have a lens that will allow me to do that, but also because I'm making those decisions based on the light that's in front of me. And here, it's just one tree with a lot of grasses. And I'm moving up in this instance. With the ICM, you are the one moving the camera. So the things in the frame might be moving, but you're the one doing the motion with the camera. Slow shutter speed, 1/4 second or slower. A lot of times I like the slower ones. I don't have to move as fast. Small aperture. So sometimes it can be f/11 if the light is low, but usually it's smaller. And low ISO, 100. My camera can do below 100 by 1, so I don't know if it's 50 or 64, to be honest with you, but I will go with the Nikon, the low one. I'm shooting the mirrorless, the Z's, and you want to turn the stabilization off. Some people like to shoot shutter priority. I prefer to shoot aperture priority or manual, and the reason I prefer that is because I'm getting a good starting point to begin with, see what my exposure is, and then what adjustments I need to make. I know that shutter priority will work just as well for a lot of people, but it's not my style. So we go with our comfort zones and what works for us. So whatever I tell you here, um, make the changes based on what your way of shooting works for you. Here at 14, right? And I'm still staying, the sky is not in here. But I'm moving, and sometimes when I move, some people do ICMs, probably a lot fewer people now. But it used to be that when people would do ICMs or swipes or motion blurs or whatever you want to call them, they would be on a tripod and move. And so everything would be nice and even and, straight. That's not my style. I like that there's some fluidity to this motion, and it, to me, it just adds to the feel of individual images. This one here is light coming in from the side, but it's cypress roots. And so you never know, what anything is going to look like until you try it. What matters, the things that matter are your subjects. So you want to look for color and contrast and patterns. How fast or slow is your speed, the shutter speed and the speed of your movement of the camera. What direction you're moving the camera. What the light level is, that drives the how long answer. And then your vision, what are you trying to do? What is your idea? And how are you going to go about trying to work it? So this is toward the end of the day. You'll notice that my ISO is 400 and f6.3. And I typically am not shooting at 1/25th of a second, but it's low light and I'm shooting reflections and I'm using motion. And so there's some portions of the sky in there, but what I did is I went from the top part, the edge of the woods and the reflection down into the water, and that's where the sky reflection comes in. But as you look at these settings, you'll see that they vary, and they vary according to the situation, the light in particular. Almost any subject can work, but a lot of times you'll see trees, flowers, plants, landscapes. In New York City, you've got a lot of architecture. You can have a lot of fun with either of these techniques, ropes, fabrics, etc. And monochromatic subjects can work. There's that play word again. In the South, there are a lot of cypress trees and knees, and in the fall, the cypress trees have fall color, and it's orange. And so this is a mix of the fall color and plants and trees that don't change their color. But again, you see that I'm sort of planning, even here, I'm looking to make sure that my horizon is level. So, cockeyed, crooked horizons don't really work for me. It's a style that some people have and like. It's not mine, but, to each his own. This one here, it's toward the end of the day. This is sunset, and one of those pastel sunsets in the Outer Banks on the ocean. And I didn't have my tripod, and it's lower light. And so what I did, and I don't know if I have my camera here, I don't know if you can look over, and I'm moving just sort of a twist here. So I'm not walking, but believe it or not, apparently I moved enough so that my horizon was not super crooked, but, layers of the water and the waves breaking there. You can do this same technique with macro and close-up. And I did. This is with a lot of macro attachments and just slow movement. I think I said this in the other program that I did. I don't know what happened here with the colors. But I love the combination here, and it's in the woods. I know exactly where I was, and I don't know how this happened, but you know, 0.4 seconds at f22. I love the movement, and I love the combination of colors, and the look and feel. This is sitting in front of some canna leaves in a friend of mine's garden. And then this is a century plant, so just slight movement. I think this was with a lens baby, so it's even more soft. In terms of the speed for your ICM, you know, slower shutter speeds are going to be your friend in terms of capturing a sense of movement and a flow. And it's just that combination. And you have to kind of work out with each individual subject what is the right speed. So in this case, it was 0.4 seconds. I can't translate that into a 1 over whatever because I'm mathematically challenged. But what my challenge here in this scene was using the grass that was in front of me, getting at a level where I didn't have a whole big block of water. There's a pond between the green grass and the cypress trees and the azaleas on the other side. And so I had to get down low enough to use that, the grass to flow into the cypress and the azaleas. So being at ground level is also helpful. You've got to figure out what's the best place to position yourself. Here I'm on a boardwalk, on a boardwalk trail in a swamp, and I held the camera in place for 3 seconds, handheld, and then the other half I moved, but I moved slowly. What I wanted, here's the intentional part of this, what I wanted was it not to just be a blur of dark and light and green. I wanted some texture, and I wanted some shape that gave enough shape and texture to allow somebody who's been in cypress swamps to know that these are cypress trees. So it was a thought out process, and ISO 64 here. I'm waiting in a parking lot for a group to get off of a trail. And while I'm waiting, I'm looking, and I'm constantly looking around for worthy subjects. And well, what could I do here? I tried the still shots. These are pine trees and palms down in Okefenokee. And this is, you can see a slight suggestion of the palms, 1/4 second movement, a lot of good separation of the darks and the lights of the trees. And so it's really just paying attention to potential subjects and just trying. They don't all work, but if you don't try it, you don't know. So you can, in terms of direction for ICMs, you can go in any direction you want. So the vertical and the horizontal panning is pretty standard. You can twist the camera, do some spinning. You can jiggle and squiggle. You can make circular motions and wavy motions. It's just really like, you know, try it out. So this was way back when I was shooting film, and this is on a tripod macro lens, and this is just a spin. So it's just a rotation, and not a very long one, obviously. But that's where I started to say, this could be kind of fun. I'm looking out at marsh grasses, and it's not exciting. You know, you would not have, and I did, because I thought, well, I'm here and I'm going to take some shots, but it wasn't very exciting. The scene wasn't exciting, except that there was a bone white tree in the middle of the marsh. And I thought, well, maybe this will work to create something a little more interesting than the straight shot. And for me, it works for that reason. This here, I'm hand holding again. This is a longer, slower shutter speed, so 1.6 seconds, and the ISO is low. The light was not as dark or dim, and I really had to work a lot to get that roll of the wave, the breaking of the wave in this scene. But you know, it was about the layers of the pink, the blue, the pink, and then of course the sand. Here's that squiggle motion. This is in front of a bush that's colorful. And again, a lot of times I'll do this when I'm looking to make photographs, but the subjects aren't all that exciting. Here's some iris, doing sort of a diagonal or oblique motion with oh God, Japanese iris. So it's about the color, it's about everything that's happening with that motion. And here's some more iris, a little bit different direction, sort of in that diagonal, and squiggling a little bit more. This was a little forest scene, and you can see kind of the branches, the broken branches that looked like, reminded me actually of, oh, where you walk through the turnstiles that you walk through. And so instead of doing a straight up and down, I did an angle. In terms of your light, I've talked about this, you know, you've got to read your light and figure out what's going to give you a good exposure. The brighter the light, the more you're going to have to work at slowing down your shutter speed. So that could require the ND filters, but lower ISO typically is going to give you slower shutter speeds. And, you know, just the light levels will direct you accordingly. This is on another boardwalk and a little bit more, and those are leaves, by the way, on the boardwalk. And so I just sort of translated it into a little bit more spooky type of interpretation. And then we go to the brighter end of the spectrum here, light and bright. And, you know, I can't tell you what my settings were. I didn't, I don't know where they are. But anyway, again, it's the ICM, it's the motion. Someone, well, a lot of people insisted, well, you can't make images at high noon. And I'm the kind of person that says, you know, well, oh yeah, I'm going to make something. And so this is what I did. I'm at the refuge and it's high noon and I'm not a napper. If I have snacks, I'm good. This is 13 seconds. And so in this case, I had a 10 stop ND on and I'm hand holding and I'm just moving up and down for 13 seconds. So this is what you get when you do that. If I didn't have the 10 stop ND, and that's my standard for neutral density, you know, when I'm doing landscapes and scenics and I'm using neutral density, that's the one I grab because well, it's always in my bag and it just works for me. But this is high noon in the woods. Here's some squiggle, and you'll notice the settings. And this is an example of sort of the approach of make the lemonade. I do several workshops at least once a year at the Outer Banks, and you get up for sunrise and you're looking for the drama and the drama's not coming. And I'm all set up, I'm waiting. I know exactly where the sun is supposed to come up in this scene and it's not happening. So you can see from the colors, the tone, the light, it's just basically a dud sunrise morning. And I refuse to leave without something. So I'm set up on the tripod and I've got what was not going to happen. It's a 13-second exposure. And what I did is instead of just shooting straight single shot without any motion, you know, just shoot the landscape, I loosened the swivel on the tripod and I just moved ever so slightly back and forth for that 13 seconds. My horizon was level. I wanted to retain the sense of the scene in terms of the landscape. But this was a way for me through ICM to make something make the lemonade out of a dud sunrise. And these are ferns. So this is just walking on a trail or in a garden. I can't remember exactly, but they're great subjects. The colors, the movement, the textures. Marsh grasses here, same thing. A lot of times I'm doing this because the straight shots are, I either have done them and I'm good, or they're not working as straight shots. And so this gives me a little bit more flexibility. Same thing here. ISO 64 and F36. That means it was pretty darn bright in that scene in order to do that. And I got 0.4 seconds. But I loved the blue and the gold in this scene. And so that's what I was going for. Trees, fall color. This is just moving up, either up and down or up or down. So some people just go in one direction and that's it. I have a tendency to go up and down. Let's see, up and down, and track with a particular part of the scene. So it's all up to you. You'll notice in the settings here it says F ? I'm a Lens Baby Trailblazer, one of 25 in the world. And I was an ambassador, one of many, but Lens Babies do not communicate the aperture that you're using. And so whenever it says F nothing and there's no information there, I know that it's a Lens Baby, and I use Lens Baby a lot. So I don't have a problem with not having the information. Here I'm making some lemonade, and this is at the end of a day. I've got these dahlia tops that I cut up, and losing my light, and I'm not getting anything with the straight shots. I'm trying to be creative, and it's just not working. And so I said, well, I'm just going to move. And so I did ICM, and for me, it's dahlia fireworks. So again, one of those little lemonade things. And a few more examples of moving, right? This is sort of swiveling here. If you have, I'm just going to give you a little bit of information on post-processing, nothing in great detail, but you can do ICM in post by using the blur filter. And feel free to screenshot or whatever. I don't do it hardly at all because I do it so much in the field. But if you had something and you thought, I wonder how it would look. These are some of the techniques that you could use. So you can use the blur filter. You can blend ICM images for different looks. And so here's a straight image. Call it straight. It's a Lens Baby Velvet 56. And that's kind of the look and feel of the velvet. An overall glow with these red clover and some other white little flowers, and taking it into Photoshop and using the motion blur. I'm not saying that this is, that I really like this, but the idea is I just wanted to show you that you can do that. And so this is Clary Sage. And I think this is a little more interesting than the clover because it has more of the vertical movement in it. And you can blend the straight shot with the blur or the motion blur, and play around with things like that. So just something else that you can do in post if you wanted to. In terms of multiple exposures, I've talked about this a little bit in the intro part. So you have to find out, does my camera allow me to do in-camera multiple exposure? And if it does, how many can I do in camera? The answer is yes. How many? And if no, you can plan and process for multiples as well. And I've got some resources that I can send to Chuck to distribute. There's a couple techniques there. If you are Olympus and you can only do 2, I actually did a whole blog post on just 2 frames because I felt sorry for people who couldn't do 9 or 10. I've been spoiled. I've been spoiled for a long time. But figure out how you set your camera up for multiples. If you need to, you need to just Google. Usually it's in the shooting menu, and down and over a few places. And there are different choices that you can make. Every subject does not need 9 or 10. In this case, these are teeny tiny purple flowers. So I think they were violets. And because of the symmetry here, and I remember doing this, I just did 10 frames in a circle. And so I was rotating. I had a lens that rotated, had a tripod collar, and that's how I was able to do this. You can still rotate. It's a little bit harder if you're hand holding or if you have a lens that does not have a tripod collar. You want to take your autofocus point and put it on a rotation point and then rotate from that in order to make it work. The things that matter, again, we're looking at, choosing your subject. I'll show you a couple examples where I don't think that they were they worked very well. But composition still matters. And so, a poorly composed image, just because it's multiple or ICM doesn't mean it's going to work. So keep that in mind. It's not a save your image type of technique. It's as I've been mentioning, intentional. What direction do you want to track the placement of your frames? How many? And trying different things. So you might start out with 8 or 9 frames, 10 frames, and you say, it doesn't need this many. Here's a subject that you could rotate for multiples. If I were going to choose this, I would probably have this. I'm guessing you can see my mouse. If somebody could just say yes or no. I would rotate off this center portion of the cactus. So here's a great starting place for multiple exposures. You've got fall color in the mountains. You've got a lot of different options in terms of areas. You can do patchwork patterns, and so that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wherever you want to place it, you could rotate. These are the patchworks. This is just tracking vertical, like you saw with the other fall colors as well. As I mentioned, not everything works. So I don't think that this really works. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't matter who else likes it, right? If you like it and it doesn't work for anybody else, that's fine. But if you don't like it and somebody else does, have at it for them, but we get to pick and choose what works for us and what doesn't. Here's another scenario where I thought, okay, this is kind of cool. I've got, the greenery and sort of the ribbons of the flowers, and I'm going to try a multiple exposure. And I did. And I don't think this really works very well. If I had more of them, right, filling the frame, maybe, but in general, I don't think this works. It doesn't work well. It might work better for ICM, right? So we get to pick and choose, and sometimes you're just not digging it. And I wasn't tuned into that. For multiple exposures, you can set your camera if you can. You pick your number of frames. There are a variety of overlay modes. The standard one that most people use and that I use a lot is average. And what it does is no matter how many frames I pick, The camera, a little computer, is averaging out all of those exposures and making one good exposure out of it. And so that's why it's important to start out with a well balanced exposure for what you want to do, because you want the camera to work with you and not against you. Another overlay mode that I do use that's interesting is the dark mode. And so what the dark mode does is it gives priority to the dark pixels in the frame. There's a lighten, and that gives priority when it's averaging everything out or putting it all together to the light pixels. And I sort of am a fan of the darken mode. If possible, I suggest that you save the source images, because there may be one that isn't working, and you can identify where it is, and you can pull that one out and process on your computer. For the mirrorless cameras, I suggest turning on the overlay mode. What that does, it allows you to see where you're placing the next frame. And I find that to be very, very helpful. If you are planning a series and you can't see, you've got to do what I used to do, which is, say, take your autofocus point, even though you may not be autofocusing, track it, place it in the frame where you're tracking, and work with that. So you take a series, you look at it, and then you evaluate to say, well, I need more frames, less frames, or maybe if I go in a different direction, then this will work better. Here's an iris on a wildlife refuge, and it's at the edge of a canal, and I'm going, okay, I don't mind getting a little wet, but in this one particular canal and this refuge, there are alligators. And I don't really want to fall in the pond. I don't want to get wet, and I don't want to be near an alligator in the water. So I've had to be really conscious of how I was rotating. I was hand holding, but I'm rotating using the center as best I could, because this is handheld, but rotating on the axis of the center of the iris. So here's an example of what your multiple exposure settings might look like in general, but this is for Nikon. So you've got your multiple exposure mode. In this case, it's in the shooting. How many frames? That's the second choice. Your overlay mode, this is now set to average. This is not my camera. This is just an internet example. Save the images. I would have that on, and the overlay shooting, that would be on as well. So it just varies from system to system what you might be looking at. Here's what I was talking about with the different overlay modes. So darken, lighten, average, and additive. I'm typically using average and darken. Those are my favorites. You can try them all, and I have. Here's a good subject for multiples. You could rotate, you could zoom, you could do a wide variety of things. I couldn't do that for this, at least in the field, because this water lily was in a pond. Here's another. So here's the starting image for the agave, and I processed the image for this look and feel. And this is rotating from the center. Again, here's another example of where I don't really feel like this worked. This image right here is it. So if I'm rotating on the center, sometimes they just don't work. And so after I saw this, I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that on this particular subject, because it didn't work for me. And you can see I've got probably I probably have 7 or 9 frames here, and I just don't like it. Composition, I've talked about, how it matters. And so this is tracking up probably 10 frames in a forest. This is rotating, multiple exposures, 9 frames, rotating in very small movements to create this curving effect. This is the nave of a church in Charleston, and I'm just looking up and just kind of picking areas. This may have been five or seven frames. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was all I needed. If you are noticing patterns and then you're just photographing in a small area, this kind of thing can work. This is in West Virginia, and what you may notice is that light is coming down. The sun is coming up, and it's running down this hill. And I'm waiting for the group to finish photographing a covered bridge. And what did I do? I'm standing waiting because everybody's doing their thing, and I say, I wonder what would happen, what it would look like if I tracked the light, not the trees. I know what that looks like, but well, what if I tracked the light? And so I did it. And so it's just a different approach, different result. And so now I kind of have a sense of what might happen if I'm in this similar situation. This is tree bark, right? So there's the original, the tree bark, and a different area of the tree, but tracking upwards. More of a rotation, zoom multiple. So shoot, zoom in, and rotate a little bit on that. More tree bark, rotating on a particular section. So isolating there. This is the Lens Baby Velvet 56 with a Raynox 250. If you're not familiar with the attachment Raynox 250, it allows and / makes you get really close to your subject. So it's not the easiest to hand hold. In fact, usually I'm on a tripod when I'm using the Raynox because I'm so close. But that's just, playing around with a dahlia. How many frames? Well, it depends, right? That's the best answer for photography. It depends. There is no, this is it, especially for these techniques. So this is a rotation. This here, it was windy. I loved this little curve in the tulip. And every time I was on a tripod and I was trying to get it. And every time I was ready to push the button, the darn wind would move. So I said, well, the heck with this. I'm doing 3 frames multiple, and I tracked up that little curlicue. And so now I have a DNA helix. Here's a lily down in South Carolina. And I'm also using a Lens Baby, a different one. And I'm rotating handheld. I'm rotating on the center of that lily. And I had to leave. So I couldn't sit there and play around with more frames. I was going to be kicked out, not that I wanted to leave. But anyway, so here's 5 frames, and these lilies, every year they come back up. And so I'm like, well, the next time I see this lily, I'm going to do more frames. And so I did, and I did it with a different lens. And this is 10 frames. And what I liked about this is that it filled in the holes. I had little openings here. It's a different exposure, different coloration, etc. And different cropping other than the square. Also handheld, but this is also, I used autofocus on the center. And when you're doing these types of things, you can pull one of your frames and layer them in Photoshop and then mask back in the center of flowers. So that's a technique that you can also use. Just some tracking vertical with 9 or 10 frames here. This is the edge of a calla lily. And I thought this was, I wasn't expecting this, but it looked like, 5 birds, purple birds, but nonetheless tracking in a diagonal way. So, you never know what you're going to get. And that's what I saw. This is very common to track vertical. Here's 3 frames. And these are 3 leaves and probably 9 or 10 frames, and I'm rotating. So I'm zooming and rotating here, creating a different look. Here's zooming in with a multiple exposure on some flowers. This is rotating, and how I know it's rotating is because I've got this little circle right in the middle, and I can see the rotation within this frame. But these are this is palm leaves. And then, you know, what happens when you have some flower that stands out and you rotate? Some cool stuff. More rotation. This is just on iris stems. So, you know, you just don't know. This is aerial view of a zinnia rotating. Sunflower. This is more symmetrical because this lens, the 70-180 Nikon Micro, has a tripod collar, and I was using it on a tripod. When you're rotating, think about also rotating off center. So what that means is that instead of your autofocus point, if you're using an autofocus point, instead of rotating off the center and then cropping, you can actually put your autofocus point or just choose a point on the corners anywhere and do your rotation, and it creates in different situations spirals. And so different designs by going off center, so they can be a little bit more interesting. This is a dogwood off center. Hydrangea, this is handheld. I'm sitting on a bench in a garden and I go, oh, I wonder what would happen if and I did it. So just to kind of give you an idea of creativity in post, you know, I use post-processing as a refining tool and not reconstruction of my images. It's a way to expand what I did in the field and what I saw, and maybe what I couldn't do in the field. So I always say that the unedited image is a missed opportunity, even if you've got it mostly right. So this is playing. So here's what I was talking about, where you've got the multiple and then choosing one frame from the center of this peony and masking it back in. So there's the multiple exposure and one frame masked back in for the center. You could do multiple exposures in post. So let me see. So you can add textures and do it that way. Let's see. So here, I just got a little off. Y'all are familiar with those brain vacations, right? So you can see that I masked back in the center of one of the source images. So I probably did 9 or 10. And in this case, I'm using Photoshop to create the image, right? And so there's some steps that you can use, and I had to try it to see if it would work. But you can reduce the opacity of each successive image, and it will give you the multiple exposure result if you're not able to do multiples in camera. So if you just plan for it, you can do it, and it absolutely works. If anyone, I would imagine where you are, maybe you've heard of the Pep Ventosa technique. You can use it for still lifes and indoor, but also a lot of times you'll see it in the round, you know, circling a tree. I just saw recently somebody circling a street light. Pep Ventosa, you need to look him up because he does architectural techniques, not necessarily in the round, but this is something you could do at home inside when it's cold. You get a Lazy Susan if you don't already have one, and you set up your bouquet of flowers, and you take as many frames as it takes to rotate that around back to the beginning. And what you'll notice here is that we've got the rotation effect. I did have wrinkles in my fabric, which is something you do need to pay attention to, but I masked back in parts of the flower. So here's the starting point, right? And a steamer and an iron would do well for the fabric down below. We can fix that, okay? You know, but here I can do 10 frames in camera, but I can't do 24. I could do several sets, but here what I do when I'm using this technique inside for still life and whatnot is I use the one finger to say this is the start of the rotation. I take all of these shots, and there are 24 of them, and then in the last frame it's two fingers, and so that's peace out, I'm done, this is the end, and everything in between those two fingers is what I'm going to work with. And so there's a script that you can run in Photoshop, and I can pass that along to you. If for some reason what I send doesn't work, you can go to Charles Needle's website on his resources, and he has the same script available. You load it into Photoshop, and you basically pick that section of images, and you click run the script, and you watch it, and it just does, and it gives you the result. And then you use the technique of masking back in. So here's basically what happens is, and here's another example of that same technique. So I'm rotating, and when you're autofocusing on this kind of technique, I would probably rotate using the center top here, this top edge, because that's going to be stationary. These flowers are rotating. And what I have found is that you need some outcroppings. Balance is important. And so the end result in this case is a little bit different than the other. And I've only masked in a little bit of the flowers, but it's a fun technique for you to try. And I remember Lazy Susans growing up, and now I have probably about 3 or 4 because I use that technique. Back to in the camera. I call it image weaving. And this is where you 2 images, that's it. And so here are some variations, one vertical, one horizontal, and you're not moving, vertical, horizontal, and you're moving in both cases, or variations of both of these things. And so what you see in the small frame is what my subject was. And this is just me like moving down, and then I might flip the camera and I move in the other direction. So it's just 2 frames. And this here, these are the 2 frames, and this is the result. So you can think about what you might be able to do with architecture, right? The building windows, you name it, just pick. Here's using that same technique with motion. You can work different angles. You don't have to go up and down. This is actually doing that same technique with fall color reflections in a pond. So, telephoto lens for that. This is a tree with some type of tree in a botanical garden with these tiny, smaller pine cones. And oh gosh, what was this? I think this was decorative ornamental cabbage. 2 frames. This is average mode, and this is dark mode. So here's the difference. Here's average and dark. And so you see that it's giving more attention to and priority to the dark tones in the image. This was the cabbage as well. And so you can see suggestions of the cabbage here, but it's your vision. And, I find that these 2 techniques can sort of allow you to flex your muscles and get a little creative and really feel that what if and I wonder are 2 of the most provocative phrases that you can ask yourself, because it does encourage you to try something different. And, if it doesn't work, so what, right? You tried it. So that is what I have to share with you. And I'm going to stop my screen share. And I did say I was going to stop, but I wasn't interrupted. And it would have been fine if you did. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, Ms.
Question.
Davis,
Oh, go ahead.
Jamie. One of your colleagues, Roxanne Overton, amount of color editing in her
Mhm.
post work.
Yes.
So much so that well, it's a little distracting, although some of them are really beautiful.
Mhm.
You haven't, is that the kind of thing that sounds to me you just can't pick it up from a book. You're going to have to pick it up from the author. And I didn't know how you felt about that technique in general, or is that like, well, sure, some people like it and some people don't.
It's like I don't like lima beans. My husband loves them, right? I mean,
Yeah,
just use that as an example. So we all have different leanings in terms of what our images look like, how we interpret colors, and I think, even stuff that I do, I look back and I go, I might do that a little bit differently now, right? But yeah, I've seen Roxanne's work, and some of it is really beautiful, and others, I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say they're ugly, because that's not really the right word, but they might not be the way I might handle. But that's the beauty of this whole creative genre and art, is that we get to do what we do. Just think of Jackson Pollock with his paint splatters. You look at that and you go, gosh, I could do that. But somebody, he didn't really care whether somebody liked it or not. And you look at oh gosh, some of the other abstract artists, and their approach and technique is definitely very, very different. And so that's the same with the
yeah,
ICM.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I have a question related to the ICM. I know it sounds like there are no rules, but as a rule of thumb, if you're like the beach scenes that you had, which were incredible,
Thank
if you're shooting that, is the idea to pan horizontally? If you're shooting like a tree or tall flowers, you would shoot vertically. I mean, is that basically the rule of thumb?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's my first choice, right? Because it's just like when we photograph, we're photographing trees, they're upward, right? So that's the first way. We might shoot a vertical, or we might be paying attention to, the straightness. With the landscapes, we've got the horizon. And so that might be my first. If I were going to try, say, on those pastel sunsets, that might be an interesting one to try shooting kind of down, right? Or doing, kind of a wavy motion, right? As long as your movement is long enough to get kind of a rolling sense. Yeah, your first inclination is to do one or the other, but I think that's where you sort of stretch things and try it different ways.
Right. Thank you.
Mhm.
Jamie, can you do ICM with a cell phone? Not that it would be my first choice, but can you do it with a cell phone?
Yeah, I have an Android, and I know there are a lot more options with iPhones, but I just
Right.
refuse. But I think there's slow shutter, and there are some other apps, Average Cam Pro or something you can do them. Um, and some people do really wonderful, ICMs and multiples with the cell phone. I'm not one of them. In fact, I tried ICM in one particular situation, and it just wasn't. It was very textured, like it was just jagged, and so it wasn't. It wasn't a flow thing. Could I have taken it into the computer and, smoothed that out? Yeah. But and
Well,
now the multiple exposures, that's fun to do in with your phone. I can do that. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
there are also ND filters for cell phones, so you can put those on and see what you can do yourself. Um,
That's true.
along with polarizers, that very big now for the
Yep.
cell phones. So there's a lot.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, you absolutely can. You just have to have the right attachment for them.
Yeah,
Um, and these companies that make the filters for phones are really just more friendly to iPhone people.
right, right.
But
Thank
it's
you.
possible. Uh-huh.
Yeah, the other thing I'll mention is on Canon cameras, you can take one exposure and then just with the ability to just then see right through the lens to do a second, so you can get your position set up.
Yes.
So it's not, it's not all a total waste, it's just a little more work.
No, no. I mean, and that's what is that with the DSLRs? Because I know
Yeah,
the mirrorless you
yeah.
definitely can.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, some DSLRs, offer the overlay where you actually see where you're putting the next frame, and other cameras just don't. So you have
Yeah.
to use your planning.
Right.
I have another question, and thank you. Your images are captivating. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
Maybe I missed this, but it felt like most of your ICM, with the exception of the seascapes, were uh, compositions that were otherwise fairly still, didn't have a lot of inherent motion occurring in them.
Right.
And I wonder how often you might try ICM where there is motion, like a waterfall might be an example where, the water is streaming but the, rocks behind the falls are stationary. Is that just make it too complicated, or do you ever try that technique, or what do you think about that?
Well, I haven't tried it, but if you think about, okay, I'm just thinking about one waterfall in particular. And this is I don't know if you've heard of it, Taganic. It's in the Finger Lakes. And so it's taller than Niagara Falls, but it goes straight down and it's surrounded on either side. So you've got kind of, the water falling. And I think, the water's moving and you're moving. It's kind of like trees, right? Say a lighter tree in the middle and darker trees on the side. I haven't tried much with waterfalls, but it would be interesting to play around with that.
Yeah, I was just curious. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of blurring a blur.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, that's
Good
where,
morning.
your longer exposures get you the water, but
Yeah,
that's not ICM.
right.
Yeah.
Taganik Falls are just outside of Ithaca, New York.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and by the way, it's Taganic, don't panic. Whenever you're trying to figure out how to actually pronounce something, you ask the visitor center lady, and I was like, well, it really sounds much better Taganic, but she said no, Taganic, don't panic. I was like, well, okay. But it's a beautiful waterfall, and yeah, the Finger Lakes are beautiful anyway.
Yeah.
Um,
Any other questions, folks?
I'll just throw one last one out there. When you're shooting with ND filters, and obviously it's bright,
Mhm.
it's sort of like you're almost blind shooting at one point, or do you have it on a tripod so you know exactly what you want to do?
Well, with the mirrorless, I'm gonna tell you that with the
Yeah,
mirrorless, I can see through
yes, that's
a
right.
10 stop.
Yeah,
If it's a DSLR, yeah,
right.
you can't see through a 10 stop, but you could see through probably a 3, maybe a 6 if you're lucky.
Yeah, you're right. That's
Yeah.
right.
And if that were something that you were going to try to do with the DSLR, maybe putting it in live view,
Yeah, that's right.
live view would help you out there.
Right.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you, Jamie. It was a wonderful presentation. I think a lot of people are going to be trying some of these techniques, and we'll be seeing them in the next months coming up in our competitions.
Good. Chuck, I will email you unless you are unless you have it from the last camera club meeting, the resources for the Photoshop steps
You
and,
should email it.
okay, anybody who's interested in the, how to take, however many frames, multiple, and stack them in Photoshop and process them that way, or run the script if you want to try Lazy Susan. But seriously, like, you've got to look up Pep Ventosa. His work is just crazy. Talk about, 24 images. He's using hundreds. So really, really eye-opening. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie.
All right, enjoy your
I'll be in
evening and your
touch.
holidays.
I'll be in touch with Paula at Lens Baby. Do you know Paula?
I do.
Okay, I'll be in touch with her and we'll see what we can work out.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Thank you, everybody.
All
Have a
right.
wonderful
Thank you.
week.
Thanks to
We'll
all.
see you at the dinner next Monday.
Mhm.
Try to stay warm out there.
Not easy.
All right.
We can try.
Take
Bye.
care. Thank you
Thank
so
you all.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.